This is the story of Kristen Rossom, a brilliant young toxicologist whose life took a fatal turn, leading her down a path of deceit, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. Kristen Rossom was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all. Born into a loving family in Claremont, California, she grew up in an environment that most people would envy. Her parents were highly educated professionals who instilled in Kristen and her siblings the importance of hard work, discipline, and the pursuit of excellence. Her father, a respected economist, and her mother, a talented linguist, ensured that their children were given every opportunity to succeed. Kristen, the eldest, was the golden child, the one who excelled in school, participated in extracurricular activities, and made her parents proud at every turn. But as the years passed, the pressure to maintain this image of perfection began to weigh heavily on Kristen. She found herself struggling to keep up with the high expectations placed on her, and as she entered her teenage years, the cracks in her perfect life began to show. Kristen started skipping classes, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and experimenting with alcohol. What started as a way to escape the stress and pressure soon spiraled into something much darker. By the time she was in high school, Kristen had moved beyond alcohol and discovered methamphetamine, a drug that would become both her escape and her undoing. Meth, with its powerful and immediate high, provided Kristen with the temporary relief she craved. But the drug's effects were devastating. It didn't take long for meth to consume her life, leading her into a world of paranoia, erratic behavior, and desperation. Despite the chaos in her life, Kristen managed to keep her addiction a secret from her family, at least for a while. But her parents weren't blind. They noticed the changes in their daughter, the mood swings, the withdrawal from her once-cherished activities, the slipping grades. Concerned, they confronted Kristen, and after a long, tearful conversation, she finally admitted the truth. She had been battling addiction since she was a teenager. The revelation was a crushing blow to the Rossom family. They had always seen Kristen as the one who would achieve greatness, and now they were faced with the reality that their daughter was fighting a battle she might not win. Desperate to save her, they did everything they could to support Kristen, but the hold that meth had on her was strong. At just 17, Kristen reached a breaking point. In a moment of rebellion, or perhaps a cry for help, she ran away to Mexico with a group of friends, leaving her worried parents behind. It was in this foreign land, far from the pressures of her life in California, that she met Gregory DeViller. Greg was tall, handsome, and older, a man who seemed to have it all together. To Kristen, he was like a knight in shining armor, someone who could rescue her from the mess her life had become. Greg, Kristen Sr., was immediately drawn to the troubled young woman. Despite the chaos that surrounded her, he saw something in Kristen that made him want to protect her, to help her find her way back to a better life. The two quickly became inseparable, and for a while, it seemed like Greg was exactly what Kristen needed. Under his influence, she managed to pull herself out of the depths of addiction and start rebuilding her life. With Greg's support, Kristen returned to the U.S. and began to piece her life back together. She enrolled at San Diego State University, where she pursued a degree in chemistry. Her natural intelligence and determination quickly set her apart from her peers, and she excelled in her studies. After graduation, she landed a job as a toxicology assistant at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, a prestigious position that seemed to mark the beginning of a bright future. In the years that followed, Kristen and Greg's relationship grew stronger. They moved in together, and after 5 years of dating, they decided to get married. Their wedding, held on June 5, 1999, was a grand affair, attended by family and friends who believed that the couple was destined for a happy, successful life together. To Kristen's parents, Greg was the man who had saved their daughter, and they were grateful that she had finally found stability. But beneath the surface, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Kristen's battle with addiction had left scars, and the pressures of her career and marriage began to weigh on her. She started to feel restless, bored even, with the life she had built. And when she took a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, she found herself drawn to a new source of excitement, her boss, Michael Robertson. Michael Robertson was a married man, But that didn't stop him from pursuing Kristen. Their affair began quickly, fueled by the thrill of secrecy and the danger of being caught. For Kristen, the affair was a way to escape the monotony of her life, a way to feel alive again. But the excitement was short-lived. Greg soon discovered the affair, finding love letters between Kristen and Michael. Devastated, he confronted his wife, but despite the betrayal, Greg was willing to forgive her. He loved Kristen deeply and was willing to do whatever it took to save their marriage. But Kristen didn't want to be saved. The thrill of the affair, the lure of the forbidden, was too strong for her to resist. She continued seeing Michael, even as her marriage with Greg began to crumble. The once perfect couple was now trapped in a web of lies and deceit, with Greg desperately trying to hold on to the woman he loved, and Kristen spiraling deeper into her own self-destructive behavior. On the morning of November 6, 2000, Kristen woke up like it was any other day. Greg wasn't feeling well, so he stayed home while she went to work. Kristen seemed concerned, even calling his workplace to let them know he was sick. She visited him during her lunch break, and when she returned home that evening, she found him lying on the bed, unresponsive. Panic set in. Kristen called 911, her voice trembling as she told the dispatcher that Greg wasn't breathing. When the paramedics arrived, they found Greg's body on the bedroom floor, surrounded by a bed of rose petals. It was a scene that looked almost romantic, but the reality was anything but. Greg was dead, and the cause seemed clear: an overdose. Empty vials of painkillers were scattered around the room, along with torn wedding photos, suggesting that Greg had taken his own life in a moment of despair. But something didn't add up. Greg had never been one to use drugs, and the idea of him committing suicide was unthinkable to those who knew him. His family, in particular, refused to believe that Greg would take his own life, especially in such a dramatic and unusual way. They demanded an investigation, halting Greg's cremation so that an independent autopsy could be performed. The results of the autopsy were shocking. Greg had an extraordinarily high amount of fentanyl in his system, along with traces of other drugs. Fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid, is 150 times stronger than morphine, and in the wrong dose, it's deadly. The toxicology report made it clear Greg hadn't taken the drugs on his own. Someone had given them to him, and that someone was Kristen. As the investigation unfolded, more and more evidence pointed to Kristen as the person responsible for Greg's death. She had the knowledge and the access to the drugs that killed him, and her affair with Michael Robertson provided a motive. The prosecution argued that Kristen had killed Greg because he had discovered her affair and was threatening to expose her. They painted a picture of a woman who had become so consumed by her double life that she was willing to kill to protect it. The trial was a media sensation, with people across the country following every twist and turn. Experts debated how the fentanyl was administered, whether it was through a drink, an injection, or perhaps even inhaled. The defense argued that Greg had taken the drugs himself, either in a moment of despair or as part of a reckless experiment. But the jury didn't buy it. After a grueling trial, Kristen was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story of Kristen Rossom is a tragic one. It's a story of how a life filled with potential can be derailed by addiction, poor choices, and the inability to face reality. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking escape in all the wrong places and the devastating consequences that can follow. As you think about Kristen's story, ask yourself, what would you do if faced with the same pressures, the same temptations? Would you make the right choices? Or would you, like Kristen, find yourself on a path that leads to darkness? It's a question worth considering because the line between good and evil, between a life of promise and one of despair, is often thinner than we realize.